Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, there's said to be a hidden facility. A dying man claimed it manufactured UFOs. Before he disappeared, he explained the entire system on 4chan. And if he was telling the truth, even the President of the United States is being kept in the dark. May 8th, 2026. The United States government releases its UFO Files, an official government website, a presidential directive, 170 declassified documents, military reports, pilot accounts, photographs, videos, files going back to the 1940s, released to the public with no clearance required. But here's the problem. The files are mostly inconclusive infrared images, redacted witness statements, objects nobody can identify because there just wasn't enough data to identify them. The War Zone, a military journalistic website, called it a shrug. John Greenwald, who had spent decades filing FOIA requests for exactly this kind of material, said publicly that Batch 01 doesn't have the good stuff. But here's what nobody is talking about. The most interesting thing in the May 8th release isn't in any of the files. It's the fact that the sitting president of the United States had to personally direct his own administration to go find this information. Trump issued that directive in February. It took until May to get the first batch. The president asked. The answer wasn't instant. In 2023, an anonymous engineer posted this on 4chan. The phone rings everywhere, but the president's office. This video is about that post. What would it look like if someone who actually knew just told you? Someone on a paranormal image board, anonymous, with no credentials, no proof, and no reason to believe any word of it. Except, it never really fell apart. By the end of this video, you'll have to go read every major claim this person made, and you'll understand why, 3 years later, nobody has definitively debunked the post, and why the government's own release makes it harder to dismiss. Every few months, someone posts something on 4chan's X board claiming they know something. They drop a vague claim, get called a laugh, and within 48 hours the thread is dead and nobody remembers it. But this one, it lasted 2 weeks. It ran across 2 separate threads, generated hundreds of responses, and the poster did something that almost never happens on that board. They kept coming back. Thread 1 was April 24th, 2023. Thread 2, early May, same post returned, specifically citing the chemo fatigue as a reason for the gap. The archives are still live, 133-page compiled PDF is still circulating. This isn't some obscure post that no one's heard of, but most people who have heard of it never really read it. And that's what we're going to do today. The opening line of this post was, I have intimate knowledge of what the US currently knows about UFOs, minus the last 2 years. Then immediately 5 specific points. 1. UFOs are primarily unmanned drones. 2. They are built to specification each time they are deployed. 3. They are created by a mobile construction facility hiding in the ocean. 4. The facility destroys anything that approaches it. 5. The US believes it has been active on Earth for at least 100 years, possibly much longer. Manufacturing, mining, management. That was the framework. And every answer across the 2 weeks of questions fits inside. Who was this person? They never gave a title or discipline. When someone asked directly, the thread ended before they answered. What they described across 2 weeks was the work of someone inside of a crash retrieval program that, in their words, doesn't officially exist, and I won't use the internal name on here either. And then the detail that explains the entire thread. Yes, liver cancer sucks. That's their answer to, didn't you swear to secrecy? 3 words, no further elaboration, and no proof. They added, I'm not going on national TV or radio. I'm on a 4chan board. Cancer makes you feel a little different. Terminal illness, on chemotherapy, choosing the most chaotic confession booth on the internet. Either the perfect setup for an untraceable hoax, or the only circumstance under which someone with real knowledge would ever speak. This is the element that sets the thread apart from almost every other UFO claim. a factory operating continuously in the Atlantic Ocean. Shaped like an extremely large UFO, but more of a burger design, almost never leaves the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, it will sit through hurricanes and only move elsewhere to release or receive a UFO. No visible weapons or cockpit from sat footage. It also does not use any lights, unlike other UFOs. The main construction facility does not rust or deteriorate, from what we can tell. The team had a nickname for it. Older members called it Atlantis. So how do you track something with no heat signature, no lights, and no radar return? We rely mostly on detecting the gravity it produces. It normally doesn't produce heat outright. When it does, we believe it's in the process of construction, since a small heat buildup can be detected when a craft returns or exits. You can track it by the dent it leaves in gravity, and what happens if you get close. The last unit we saw approach the facility didn't even have time to communicate. They were being attacked before it was over. At one point we deployed fighters in a sub with serious intent. Everything except the sub was lost. This weapon destroys the matter it hits entirely. It also shoots on anything electronic in the vicinity. Everything except the sub was lost. The weapon destroys matter. It kills electronics in range. No communication, no warning. Presumably, the sub survived because it was already underwater, below whatever the engagement radius is. What happens to the craft it builds when they return? Based on heat signatures, likely smelted down into parts. It feels more like a carrier, but with construction capability. Built on demand, deployed, returned, smelted, repeat. Which explains why so few intact craft ever get recovered. They're built to be used, not to be kept. What does the recovered hardware actually look like? First, a correction to something embedded in popular UFO culture. Things like triangles and hard-edged squares don't exist. Triangle UFOs are one of the most reported shapes in modern sightings. Black triangles over Belgium in 1989. The Phoenix Lights. Dozens of AARO submissions. But per this account, those aren't theirs. So what does exist? Pill shapes are extremely sought after. Some we think are freighters. Cigar-shaped are very rare. We were told finding one would be career-changing. Both pear and burger shapes are known builds. Size, shape, and speed are the factors we use to determine purpose. We get it wrong sometimes. The material? An alloy we cannot reproduce, but only repurpose. It's kind of like a film that fits over the frame of a craft. One of the main problems when repurposing is getting it hot enough. It absorbs heat very well. And the power source? For anyone who knows the name Bob Lazar, the power source is E115. It produces its own gravity field. Bob Lazar handled E115, which was already pulled out, which is rare and weird. Protocol now is that only one person is allowed to handle E115. When someone pointed out that element 115 has a half-life of milliseconds under lab conditions, the response was, correct, still a massive problem. The light system? One of the most discussed elements of the entire thread is the light system. If you've ever seen a UFO report when someone describes colored lights, this will change how you read it. Orange is a mineral bioscanning mode. Since most people see orange up close, you're likely being scouted or selected for an abduction. It can see your heart beating and even the valves pushing the blood inside, just to add some perspective. Red lights are considered defense mode. If red lights are present, chances are the craft wants to leave and has to keep an eye on you while they wrap up. Red also allows very accurate calculation of distance and can detect hostility based on facial expression. That last detail. Read it again. It can read your face. If a weapon is fired, the beam is white. So orange, you're being studied, possibly selected. Red, it wants to leave, it's watching you, and it's reading your face. White, something's about to get destroyed. The poster also described hammer-shaped tools, used as mobile scouts, emitting highly bright light, used for spotting minerals or living things. If you've ever reported a bright orb that seemed to respond to you, per this account, that response was intentional. It saw you first. On the occupants.
Humanoid, very humanoid. They are smaller than humans and look like your typical grey aliens, hole for ears. They can look at very bright objects without being blinded. I've never seen one move their mouth.
Gender.
We haven't seen any females. We think it's mainly a military operation, or they just don't have them, hence male only.
Physical confrontations.
Probably. Their size and frame are one of the reasons they don't make it through crashes often.
And then the question everyone eventually asks, what do they think of us? A senior official apparently said something in the poster recalled word for word.
They act like keepers of a zoo, uninterested in the daily life of wildlife until there's a problem. Zookeepers aren't friends with the animals.
Someone asked why they don't bother recovering their own dead or crashed craft.
They cut their losses.
Every UFO narrative eventually has to answer one question. Why are they here? Most answers reach for something grand. Here to help us, harvest us, waiting for humanity to spiritually evolve. This thread's answers are less flattering.
I agree the idea was pitched that they are waiting for us to mature, or perhaps something bigger to arrive, and they don't want us to ruin the planet in the meantime.
The planet. That word choice matters. Keeping us from ruining the planet implies they have a stake in it.
They could absolutely destroy us if they wanted to. They have started launch sequences before that we suspect were tests on what they are dealing with. My personal view is that they have to stay out of our way, but keep us from destroying ourselves.
And what are they actually extracting while they wait?
The last miner we looked at had a huge haul of gold, iron and silver. No dirt.
Mining operations, industrial extraction, and a standing requirement to keep us from destroying the facility they are working in, which happens to be the planet we live on. One of the most consistent themes across both threads is their relationship with nuclear weapons.
They mostly want very little to do with us until we start to talk about war and nuclear options. It's one of the reasons you see them so often at critical events. It's hard to get them to respond to us in general.
Communication attempts?
About once every 10 years for the US.
From a senior official, after the most recent nuclear-related intervention, the poster witnessed.
The phone rings everywhere but the president's office.
The sitting president of the United States is not on the contact list. Someone asked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
We never came to a solid conclusion, other than they may not have realized our capability until we used them. They were interested in test sites, but never actually stopped the ones we set off.
That's an interesting detail. They didn't know what we were doing until we did it. The thread's discussion of abduction strips away every New Age interpretation built up around the subject over the last 70 years. No star families, no spiritual upgrading. These are tools, described with the same flat effect as the mining equipment.
A common tool we find is one that seems to scramble coherent thoughts and make the subject childlike. The best way I can describe it is like forcing a stroke without actually having one. It makes you delirious, but also childlike for a few hours. The tools I didn't talk about are ones that are designed to take objects the size of pills and push them deep into your tissue and stomach. These tools aren't friendly and don't account for extreme pain. There's also another tool that looks like a circular battery you would find in a key fob, designed for keeping your eyes open when deployed. It also stops the eye from moving almost perfectly.
Who gets selected?
They like picking from remote areas exposed to radiation or disease. They have a distinct fascination with radiation. When Fukushima happened, the construction facility deployed multiple UFOs to the location over multiple weeks.
Every famous abduction account on record, Whitley Strieber, Betty and Barney Hill, Travis Walton, describes the same experiences. Being unable to move, eyes forced open, something inserted into the body. For decades, people assumed those were just the sensation of being taken. This thread describes the hardware that produces those sensations. Whether you believe any of them or not, the overlap is very specific. The poster worked on what they described as Team 2 of crash retrieval. Here's the actual process.
First team deals with the occupants and initial discovery. We arrive and meet with an external member who can touch and examine parts we are not allowed to interact with. we never have to cut our way into the UFO. First order of business is check in for E-115. Then, leave in the ship to send it away. We return and look for any tools and loose objects. We then strip any specialized components, sensory equipment, navigation. A third and fourth team arrive to remove the bulk of the craft.
An external member with higher clearance than the team handling the wreck. Someone who can touch things the poster cannot. Classification layers above theirs. And then what happens if there are survivors?
One example, shortly after I joined, one was down but 2 occupants were alive. The first team couldn't get close without being attacked. Aliens never seemed to recover their lost UFOs, so just waited a few days until they died, and then recovered the UFO.
Another interesting detail the poster mentioned.
Before I left, we were looking at what we thought was a lab of some kind for genetics.
Someone asked if the beings are aware of human computer technology.
They know about ours, yes. I doubt they could operate ours with our input devices, though.
And asked how theirs work.
Describing their version of a console computer is really hard. It works by holding it and thinking about what you want. If you were distracted even slightly, it goes to dish.
A physical object operated by sustained focused thought. Distraction breaks it. You'd be completely unable to use theirs. They'd be completely unable to use yours. The organizational structure described is one of extreme compartmentalization. The program doesn't officially exist. The poster refused to use its internal designation.
The US Air Force is kept in the dark. We operate above them. A close co-worker wondered if even the president knew, namely Trump, because we thought he would just tell everyone. I heard the phrase "F Bill Clinton" thrown around regarding access to information. I'm pretty sure he asked.
Clinton asked, was apparently told no. And Space Force?
Openly stated to us, discovery for internal use and disinformation to the public.
On secrecy in general?
Secrecy is all but gone. Now it's just about obfuscation and misinformation.
The strategy shifted from keeping secrets to making noise. Information that's technically public but buried in enough contradictory claims to be functionally invisible.
We used to laugh at Russia and Chinese designs. We stopped laughing at China when they produce an operational but buggy version of their mining equipment. Still stumps most of our engineers. China still scares us.
American progress?
Modifying them to fight human weapons is a big thing. Generally trying to test and research ways to reduce inertia.
Commercial spillover?
A lot of your stealth aircraft sports smoother designs. Learning to track them helped with targeting software. Laser technology comes to mind since it's a crippled version of what they use. You see lasers everywhere, even in retail.
On Lockheed Martin?
Such a great company, aren't they? Definitely wouldn't be the type to try to leak things to the public.
When asked about significant years, the poster kept returning to one. 2002.
A lot of activities and changes in operation for both them and us. A lot of secrecy issues surfaced that year. Funding also jumped through the roof.
When pressed for specifics, 2 names came up. The Eric Davis Memo, otherwise known as the Wilson-Davis Memo, an alleged record of a meeting between Admiral Thomas Wilson and physicist Eric Davis in 2002, in which Wilson supposedly described a private company holding retrieved non-human technology beyond government oversight. The poster's comment on those documents.
I did find the date on the 3rd page interesting because 2002 was a very unique year for us.
What triggered the activity spike, the secrecy crisis, the funding jump? The poster never really answered. They said they'd asked about it. Asking about it was apparently a bad move. The thread is 3 years old now. Hundreds of people have tried to break it, but nobody has. The claims aren't verified, but the internal structure holds. Here's what a typical insider testimony looks like on X versus what this does. Typical insider is a lap. Everything is explained, never admits uncertainty, escalates with each question, claims access to everything, tells you exactly what you want to hear. This thread refused to name the department, refused to discuss the Varginha incident in Brazil, refused to engage with Antarctica, said I don't know repeatedly, said we got it wrong sometimes, admitted the team frequently misidentified craft purpose based on shape and speed. A fabricator maximizes. Volunteering, we get it wrong sometimes, has nothing in it for them. The tone throughout reads as a tired professional who ran out of reasons to stay quiet.
You'll notice yourself coming back to the things I've said over time, on your own, as understanding increases.
Here's what a competent fabricator could have designed. 1. Anonymous forum, 0 verification possible, if ever. 2. Terminal illness creates urgency that explains the decision to talk, and conveniently explains why proof can't be produced yet. 3. The lockbox, the promised dead man switch that would verify everything after death, has never materialized, even 3 years later. 4. The claims track almost perfectly onto existing law. Element 115 from Bob Lazar, Greys, government compartmentalization, ocean-based USOs. A sophisticated hoaxer reads everything first, then writes something that confirms it all with a consistent veneer. 5. Consistency isn't unique to truth. Well-constructed fiction is consistent. A skilled writer with a week to plan their story and the discipline to stick to it across a 2-week Q&A is rare, but possible. 6. The refusals and the I don't knows, which look like authenticity markers, are also exactly what you'd write into a hoax to make it look authentic. Every credibility marker this thread has can be reverse engineered, but that doesn't mean it was. It just means you can't get out of it by pattern matching. Here's what the thread aligns with from independent sources. USO concentration in the Atlantic. Decades of unidentified submerged object reports are disproportionately concentrated in the Atlantic, particularly around the Bermuda Triangle. The poster noted the facility almost never leaves the Atlantic and acknowledged USO activity off the west coast of the Americas, but said they only monitored the Atlantic. That's a narrower claim than the typical "it's everywhere" narrative. David Grush. In 2023, the same year as this thread, former intelligence officer David Grush testified under oath to Congress that the US has conducted crash retrieval programs for non-human craft. The poster's crash recovery team structure maps onto what Grush described without echoing his exact language. Bob Lazar and Element 115. Lazar described Element 115 in 1989. The poster's description of handling protocol, only one person allowed and rare to find it pre-extracted, is a different detail than Lazar's account. An addition, but not a repetition. The Wilson-Davis documents. Those documents do exist. They were leaked and have been discussed seriously by researchers. The 2002 date the poster flagged is the same date referenced in the memo. Drone and swarm warfare. The description of purpose-built, single-mission disposable craft maps closely onto how advanced drone doctrine has developed in conventional warfare in the years since the thread posted. No hard contradictions anywhere in the thread. In this field, that's rarer than it sounds. The thread went dark after roughly 2 weeks. By 2024, it was being compiled, archived and dissected across Reddit. PDFs, Imgur albums, 133-page formatted transcripts. Why does a 3-year-old anonymous 4chan post still have an active community rebuilding it from scratch? Well, partly timing. The thread posted in April 2023. Grush's congressional testimony was June 2023. 2 months apart. The poster never mentioned Grush. The poster's account does not require Grush to be true. But the structural overlap, crash retrieval programs, above DoD compartmentalization, private sector involvement, created a feedback loop between the two that could never really be planned, because the details were never broken. Both threads closed the same way. No reveal, no proof. Gradually, fewer replies. The poster cited chemo fatigue, frustration with off-topic questions, and a week that was going to be rough. And a note about a lockbox.
There is a lockbox that I've asked to be opened after my death. Hopefully part of that makes it to this board, as I've instructed.
That was 3 years ago. The lockbox has not been opened, or if it has, nothing has surfaced. We don't know if the poster is alive. We don't know if the lockbox exists. We don't know if anyone has the instructions. The thread ended the way it started. Just text on a screen, and then nothing. Across both threads, a few personal details leaked through. The poster mentioned their marriage came under strain from the secrecy. Most co-workers have no prior interest in UFOs, or pretended they didn't. They were asked if they still believe in God.
Absolutely not.
They were asked if they thought humanity might be the creation of these beings.
We both look very similar. It wouldn't surprise me, and I'm inclined to think so.
And towards the end,
it has a very weird way of making you appreciate everything. I actually taste the water I drink now, if that even makes sense. Appreciate it, though I'm pretty off though.
Someone asked if he was scared. He just said he wasn't worried. Terminal diagnosis, nothing left to lose, no reason to care what happened. Then, almost as an afterthought,
I say that, but the internet glitched the night I made the first thread, and I panicked enough to sleep with a revolver.
That's the tell. Someone with nothing left to lose doesn't sleep with a revolver. Someone who just told a specific truth on a public forum and then heard their internet cuts out does. We started this video with May 8th, 170 files on a rolling release from a presidential directive. Those files are inconclusive at best. Mostly just low-resolution infrared footage, redacted witness statements, or sightings with no outcomes. The government said so themselves. These are unresolved cases. But step back from the files and just take a look at the structure of what just happened. A sitting president with full executive authority had to issue a formal directive to even begin locating this information. It took months, multiple agencies, and a new dedicated website for this to happen.
Openly stated to us, discovery for internal use and disinformation to the public.
That's what the poster said in 2023. What Pursue released on May 8th is technically public. Anyone can download it. It tells you almost nothing. The question is whether these files are the files that matter. More tranches are coming, rolling releases every few weeks, which means every few weeks the same questions will get asked again and again. Is this the batch where the structure the 4chan poster described finally shows up in official documentation? So far, no. But the releases have only just started. So the big question, is this a genuine leak? An elaborate hoax? Something in between? Partial truth or partial fabrication? With a purpose nobody here can identify from the outside. But here's what I can say with certainty. These 4chan threads do exist. The 133-page PDF is still in circulation. I'll even post links to the archives in the description. The user was anonymous, as is the 4chan way. They submitted no evidence, photos, or documents for proof. There was no deathbed follow-up, but no definitive debunk has emerged either. Everything else is open to interpretation. So what this thread constructs, regardless of whether any of it is true, is a completely coherent, alternative model of the UFO phenomenon. An industrial operation running continuously, with no particular interest in humanity beyond what we contain and what we sit on. A manufacturing operation out in the Atlantic. Mining runs across the planet. Disposable drones on specific missions. Intervention only when nuclear thresholds are approached. Humanity watches as a seeming annoyance in the way of something they want. If this is real, the most significant ongoing fact in human history has been parked in the Atlantic for over a century. And the people who know about it have been actively lying to everyone, including their own presidents. If it is a hoax, someone in April 2023 wrote one of the most disciplined, internally consistent, emotionally credible pieces of modern internet folklore ever posted, then simply disappeared. There's no proof either way.